Whether this is business or chasing your goals, chasing your dreams, or the NFL, you have a moonshot goal, and stick to that moonshot goal and ask for help if you need it. Bang on the doors, knock on the doors, and you're good enough. If you believe and you work hard and you sacrifice and dedicate yourself, you're good enough and you can achieve and you can accomplish. And don't think that you're less than anybody, no matter what their status is and no matter what your status is. All human beings are equal. So go out there, put your head down, work, show out, prove yourself, and all the right things should happen for you. And it worked out really well for me, but I still think I left a little bit of meat on the bone. What's up, people? It's Brendon Ayanbadejo, Super Bowl champ, 3-time Pro Bowler, 10 years in the NFL, Orangetheory Fitness franchisee. I'm into private equity and venture capital investing, and I'm on the game plan. Let's do it.
Welcome back to another episode of The Game Plan. I'm Tim Cott, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jay Kapoor. Jay, what's going on?
Tim, Happy New Year. I am thrilled to be back in 2022 with The Game Plan, where we share athlete stories that help our listeners raise their game in business and in life. And this was a really fun one to kick off the new year. Tell me if this last name sounds familiar to you. Our guest today on The Game Plan, we have NFL linebacker Brendon Ayanbadejo.
Absolutely. Sibling, I think younger brother of former Game Plan guest Femi Ayanbadejo. Brendon, 12-year NFL career, Super Bowl champion, 3-time Pro Bowler. But what's he doing off the field?
Yeah, well, Brendon embodies a lot of the qualities that you and I really cherish and find in common with some of the most successful athletes that we have on the show. Brendon always had this mindset that the NFL stands for not for long, and he started planning for life beyond the game pretty early on. I'm sure that helps when you have an older sibling in the NFL that you can look up to. So, Brendon and I have this really great conversation about perception, about our own perceived limitations, and about creating an independent identity, which I think that's something that, those of us that really draw our identity from our jobs can struggle with when that's taken away, much like NFL athletes do when they first leave the game behind. So Brendon talks about how he struck that balance of leveraging his cachet as an NFL athlete for access, but then also building upon his own business acumen to eventually go on to become a really successful franchisee of the Orangetheory Fitness franchise. Tim, are you familiar with the Orangetheory Fitness?
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't done it myself. I know there's one in my neighborhood, but I'm curious, is this something where he's just kind of dipping his toe in and writing checks to launch some of these, or is he actually getting pretty involved?
Oh, no, man. Brendon is super in the weeds. I'll let him tell you the story about how they decided on new Orangetheory Fitness locations, because that was a pretty fun learning for me. But I think especially interesting for a lot of our guests is going to be to hear the unit economics of running an actual box. I think that was pretty cool. Brendon and I dived into just understanding what it takes to run each box profitably and how all of that rolls up into a larger location rollout strategy. And then we also touched on a few other things as well. I mean, Brendon will tell you himself, he is a huge Tesla bull, as he likes to say. And I think with the success of Tesla, Brendon was telling me how he's now made more money in the markets than he had over his 13-year NFL career, which I just think is so freaking impressive. I think Brendon is a great case study of someone thriving in their second act. From Orangetheory to Tesla to angel investments, we kind of cover it all. And I'm stoked for people to hear this episode of The Game Plan.
Awesome. Well, let's get right into it. Here's Jay's conversation with NFL veteran, Brendon Ayanbadejo.
Brendon Ayanbadejo, thank you so much for joining me on The Game Plan today.
Jay, what's up? I'm excited to be on the show. I've seen your work and I am a big fan. I've seen you talk to a lot of different guys. And yeah, starting with my brother. So I'm real excited to be on. So yeah, let's dive into it.
I have no doubt that you are going to be a fan favorite just like Femi was last season. So I'm thrilled to have you. I know you're an avid listener, so you know that we like to begin at the end, so to speak. You logged 13 years in professional football. You went from undrafted free agent to Super Bowl champion, played alongside defensive legends like Ray Lewis and Ed Reed. At what point along that journey did you start to think about life after football and preparing for what came next?
Right. And then also Brian Urlacher, Jason Taylor, Junior Seau. I can't leave those greats out. But I would say that I started thinking about my next career before my football career professionally even started.
Okay.
So a lot of people know me that know my background. Maybe your listeners do or they don't. But I was cut 3 times before I made an NFL team. Coming out of UCLA, I was, all Pac-10 linebacker. Usually all Pac-10 linebackers are drafted first day. We have a bunch of starting linebackers in the league right now. So I didn't get drafted. I was a undrafted free agent. So I went to Atlanta. Atlanta cut me in camp right around now where guys are getting cut. Went home, sat at home, watched football for a year. The Bears actually called me, football season, you get cut in August. I watched football that whole season. Around January, the Bears called me, took a tryout with the Bears. They signed me. Then I went to spring, all the way up to spring. Then they cut me, and then I went to Canada. That's kind of the start of a very tumultuous road to get to the NFL, but it gets even rockier before it gets better. And I already started thinking like, okay, what's next? What am I going to do next?
Yeah. I do believe that you are the first Game Plan guest that we've had who's logged some time in NFL Europe. And I know I texted you this before. This is an audio medium, but I've got my NFL Europe shirt from the time. So, back when I worked at the NFL League office, I was obsessed with the international expansion side, and it was such a fascinating thing.
Very.
I'd love to hear the players' experience of, being in a startup league almost in a place where football isn't as popular. I mean, what was that experience like for you?
I mean, it was so amazing. And by the time I got there, the NFL Europe was already tenured. It had been maybe around for 10 years. Don't quote me on that. But my brother actually played in NFL Europe as well. Yeah. So he played for the London Monarchs. That organization became the Amsterdam Admirals where I played. So he had already had fans that were following, because your team leaves and it's the same franchise. It's just a new team name, new city. And he already had fans that started following me. So I had a warm welcoming to NFL Europe, and it was great. I think with the way that football is now, you have two options. You have the NFL and a lot of guys don't make that, or you have the CFL, which is older than the NFL. Yeah. At the time when I was playing, you had CFL and you had NFL Europe. Luckily for me, I was able to play in both and really develop my skills in both. But I thought it was amazing. Then when the Jags were purchased by Mr. Khan, he's got a UK background as well. And then the Jaguars play in the UK several times a year over year. So I was thinking like, maybe this is the launch of trying to bring some NFL back to Europe, and maybe he's going to move the Jags over to Europe. And I wrote a piece for Fox Sports on that, and it was pretty interesting just to look at the case study. But it didn't happen, and it hasn't happened yet. But NFL, especially in Germany, football is very popular, and they have German leagues. But all in all, that league was amazing, and I was sad to see it fold. But it was running at a $10 million deficit back then in the early 2000s. So the math didn't make sense, but it was a marketing play.
No, you're spot on. Back in 2013 and 14, right around that time that I think Shad Khan purchased the Jaguars, I was actually working on the international expansion models to see, do we put 8 games in the UK? Do we try to do, a different team every week? So it's Falcons Pats one week, it's, Jags Panthers another week. It's look, it's a fascinating opportunity that it is the most popular sport in the US by far. And yet, there's only pockets of interest outside of it. So it's fascinating that you got to experience it from the player's side. I'd love to talk about the transition a little bit. One of the things we talk to a lot of guys on the show about is this loss of identity and purpose. And I know for you, you said you started preparing even before you got in the league and then sort of had one eye to the future while you were in the league. How did that loss of identity or purpose in retirement from the NFL affect you? And, what are some of the ways that guys can do a better job dealing with it?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's perception. So you kind of have to change your perception. It's a double-edged sword because really you have to have laser focus to make it to the NFL. You have to be focused, and, there's a whole crew of people saying like, hey, you need to focus on your finances and what's coming next. But like, let's get through contract 1 before you do that. But when did you start becoming a football player? 5, 6, maybe 10 years old or whatever it is. And now you're 23 and you've played football for 13 years of your life, more years on this planet having played football than not having played football. And then we're teaching you that, hey, you need to have an identity away from being just a football player, but you need to be that laser focused to make it. So for me, I was fortunate that I had the path less traveled, and I wouldn't change it. I had the best experience. And I look at the numbers and the way that I did things, and I made $10 million through my whole NFL career. I think I became an athlete. I was born an athlete maybe at 5 years old, and I started playing sports and all. I lettered in 5 sports in high school. My brother only lettered in 3. So obviously, who the better athlete is, right? So I've always had an identity in sports, and sports is really just competitive fitness. But I think it's tough for guys to kind of separate like, hey, you're Brendon Ayanbadejo, the dad, the husband, the American, the Nigerian American, the father, the son, and all these other things that come before football. But football's the bread and butter. And to stay laser focused and to make it and to really extend your career, like I was able to play 13 professional seasons, you really need to intertwine your DNA into being that football player, even though you're so much more. So it's a double-edged sword. I don't necessarily have an answer, but I think it really starts after contract 1. it's a different abyss to try to tackle if guys only make it through their first contract and they're not in the league anymore, which is the majority of guys. But the small group of guys that are able to play after season 3 and into season 4, 5, and 6, then that's when that transformation needs to start happening. And you need to start looking at all the other things that make up you and who you are as a person, and then start delving and investing into those things. To do it before that, it's a little bit of a slippery slope.
No, I think it's a really fair point. And, one of the things that I love, especially about the NFL, that it really is a fraternity. Like when we've had guys on the show who've gotten jobs with other guys who've been on the show. Stu Bradley came on, and one of our guests was, leaving the NFL, and he was looking to do something new. And there is a real fraternity around that. So obviously you had your brother who played in the NFL for many years, and you were able to look to him as, one potential path out of the league. But were there other athletes that you looked to for advice or inspiration about what you wanted to pursue after football? And, were there any piece of advice that stuck out to you from that?
I think my brother and I were so different. We're just kind of cut from a different cloth. And I think you can attest to that as well, Jay, being that if you're first or second generation born in the United States. But my brother and I, we were born here, but we spent some time in my father's native country of Nigeria. And there really isn't a comp for my brother and I, even though there are other Nigerian Americans and Nigerian guys that play in the NFL. I think every team has like 5 now. But for us, there wasn't a comp for me as to what I wanted to be and what I wanted to do post-football. The closest thing I've ever had to a mentor, and he surely is one, is my brother. We're 18 months apart. But at certain times, he had to be a brother. He had to be a father. He had to be my support, my finance, emotional support, and all that. But there really wasn't a comp. I think one of the best things that I did, though, was I had a conversation with my former UCLA linebacker coach, and he became the assistant athletic director, Coach Bobby Field. Mm-hmm. And so one day I was in his office just hanging out, chopping it up with him. And he said, Brendon, you know what you need to do? He's like, you need to go to business school. And I was like, business school? Okay. I'm like, I'm in the league. I've been here for a while. I don't know when it's going to end. But maybe that's a good idea, but I don't really want to go back to school. And my kind of saying is like, school is to practice is what game day is to real life. So school is just practice. School isn't real life. You can learn a lot of things in school, but you need to really be out there to really learn, So I wasn't keen on going back to school. I just so happened to blow out my knee. And guess what? I had already started that process of applying to business school. Ed Reed, myself, and Dominique Foxworth were looking into going to business school. And then I was the first one to do it between the 3 of us. And then I think they went and did some certificates and whatnot. But I actually applied to University of Baltimore Towson Business School. I did a year there, and then I ended up transferring to George Washington University for my MBA, and we did some classes at Columbia, UCLA, and George Washington, which was amazing to be in those grad school settings. But that was the best piece of advice, was to go to business school, and I really found myself in business school. It took me 3 years, so I started in 2009, but then it was the 10, 11, and 12 season, and I graduated right after we won the Super Bowl in 2013.
Yeah, I mean, it's impressive enough for folks to do an MBA while they're, working a current job. People do executive MBAs. To do it when you are competing and, going for the playoffs and competing in a Super Bowl, I mean, that's another level entirely.
I was like, let me sit in the front row, because if I sit in the back, I'm going to fall asleep during class. But the first person I saw do that was Hunter Hillenmeyer. And now we work together. He's a GP. I'm an LP in Next Play Capital, a venture fund out of the Bay Area. But he was the first one I saw do it. And he was going to like Chicago University or Northwestern, like some prestigious MBA program. And he was doing it after school during the season as well. And I'm like, Hunter, you're the starting linebacker for the Chicago Bears. Why are you in business school? He's like, you know what, BA? There's so much that I want to do. And I'd always mess with him because he has a big old head. And I'm like, extreme cranial capacity results in extreme genius. I'm like, you just got this big ass head and this big ass brain. Of course you want to do more.
I love that. Let's talk a little bit about West Coast Fitness, which I know is, taking up a lot of your time as an entrepreneur since your NFL career. You invested a few million into it. You grew it into one of the largest owners of Orangetheory Fitness franchises and a successful cash flow business at that. So let's dive into the genesis. Why Orangetheory? Why that route coming out of business school and going into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so I think, in trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do, and I kind of figured this out later, but this anecdote will help people now. It took me time to figure it out, but you got to think like, okay, what am I passionate about? Like I told you, at the age of 5, even before that, I was an athlete. Like I lettered in 5 sports in high school, and sports are just competitive fitness, right? So I did diving, I did junior lifeguards, I did gymnastics, baseball, basketball, football, wrestling, track, And there's probably more stuff that I'm just leaving off that I did. I had a passion with fitness. It didn't have to be competitive, but as long as I was doing something every day, then, I had a passion for fitness. So that's kind of my first P, and I call this my Pea-Pod Theory. Then if you're passionate about something, is there any problems with things that you're passionate about? And my brother alluded to it. In the United States, we have obesity, hypertension, type 2 diabetes. We're a diseased group of people, very sedentary lifestyles and very rich food that we like to eat in America. And we don't really like to work out too much. So, there's a problem. I figured out there's a problem with fitness and people aren't getting fit. And if people get fit, then you can get off your diabetes medication. You can live longer. You can have a longer life and a higher quality of life. Finding something that I'm passionate about and solving a problem, I'd wake up with purpose every single day. And that's where I found Orangetheory. I found my purpose in Orangetheory. And through, waking up every single day, my cup is full. Ronnie Lott says you wake up with it. Actually, Coach Harbaugh says you wake up with an enthusiasm unknown to mankind. And so I'd wake up every day with enthusiasm unknown to mankind to go and get the world fit. Of course, I was bound by my brick and mortar locations. And now we have 55 with, around 800 average unit volume membership. So that's a lot of people that we're able to affect. The company has over 1,000 units in 30 countries. But I was waking up with extreme purpose. And since those other 3 Ps were in order, I was able to make a decent profit out of that as well.
Yeah.
Or if it's something philanthropical, which a lot of people are into philanthropy, then you don't necessarily have to be making money. Philanthropically, you're changing the world and you're helping people, which is another one of the Ps. So I give people my Pea-Pod Theory. There's 4 or 5 Ps that I need to check off. And every single thing that I do now, it has to check 4 or 5 of those Ps. And that's really the way that Orangetheory's genesis was. Like, I kind of just put the puzzle together. My wife brought me in on February 3rd, 2013. We won the Super Bowl.
Yep.
February 7th, 3 days later, she had me in Orangetheory working out. 3 days after winning a Super Bowl. And I had just been playing football for 40 weeks straight. Like, I'm 35, 36 years old. My body's beat up. And she's like, all right, we're going to go work out. And thank God she did. And it just so happened that, you have to listen to the universe talking to you. I went to the first ever Orangetheory. Now, remember, there's 1,300 locations now. I went to the first one ever. At the time, maybe there was 20 or 30. And it just so happened that their corporate headquarters were upstairs. I was living in Fort Lauderdale. It's the first one ever. The corporate headquarters are upstairs. So if all these things kind of didn't happen, I don't know if the doors would have been quite as wide open for me to go in there and say, hey, I'm thinking about franchising. What can we do in California? What's open? What's available? And that's ultimately what I did. I started, doing my research, started doing my diligence, started knocking on doors. The doors kind of opened wide up for a Super Bowl champion, which it's true. Those things happen. And along with the other things I'd done over my career, like I told you, there wasn't really a comp for a guy like me or a guy like my brother.
Yeah.
We're just so different, growing up in Nigeria, Chicago, and Santa Cruz, California. And luckily, our parents raised us the way that they did. And the doors were open for a lot of business opportunities. But I saw all those Ps were checked off for Orangetheory. And it was actually... It came late in my time doing my MBA because over the course of the MBA program, they wanted you to have your capstone and kind of launch you into what you were going to do next. For me, in the 12th hour, like I mentioned, I graduated right after the Super Bowl. So in the 12th hour is when I kind of changed my whole capstone project and I started doing the research and everything on Orangetheory, and I switched it up. And my professor's like, "What are you doing? You switched it up," because it was philanthropy at first, and then they switched it up. And I was like, "Hey, this is my passion. It's fitness. Like, I love helping people. Philanthropically, I'm still helping people, but in this avenue, like, it's direct. It's like the easiest way. I consider fitness the easiest barrier to entry to change your life. It's fitness.
Yeah.
You can go work out today, and you just got better than you were before the workout. Whereas other things, it takes a little bit more time for things to settle in. So." Obviously, I'm passionate about fitness, and it's going really well, and it's the best thing I've done. And we can talk more about the metrics and the numbers because I'm very numbers-driven as well.
I do want to get into the metrics, and we love to get in the nitty-gritty on the show. But before we do that, I love this concept of a framework because I think as busy people, right, we do a lot of things. It almost feels like there are so many opportunities out there today that find you, that can cold email you, that slip into the DMs. How did that framework come about? I think that's just an important thing for people as they're evaluating investment opportunities or even just where they invest their time. When did that start and where did the Pea-Pod Theory come from?
I won't be able to answer your question directly, but I do have another anecdote just based off of my experience that I think will be relevant in trying to figure out what you're doing or how to kickstart what it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
We were acquired in 2018 by a private equity firm, Castanea Partners out of Boston, and they've been our private equity partners now for 4 years. when we were going through this process of selling our business that we had been working on since 2013, our baby, our first business, you go out on a date and then, eventually, you might get engaged and you might get married. Well, for us, we went on a date and then we got married. And that was the process for us. And you have to kind of go through that process. But when this process was happening, I asked them, I was like, well, how many companies do you guys approach since you guys approached us? How many companies do you guys approach and how has that changed over time? And what Tim had told me, one of the partners, he said that 70% of the people used to come to us and we used to approach 30% of the people and get deals done. So people, you had to go and knock on doors, but now 30% of the doors they go and knock on, right?
Yeah.
What it changed, it was a complete flip, a complete reversal. Now, well, at least in 2018, he said, now we knock on 70% of the doors and 30% of the people come to us. So what that tells me is that these private equity companies, they're doing very well. They're knocking on doors. They're getting deals done. So if there's something you want, then you have to go knock on the door. For me, I had to go knock on the door at Orangetheory. They weren't just going to say, oh, they had no idea who I was. I went and did one workout. I was in the system. Like, it's not like they have some magical number that, oh, Brendon Ayanbadejo, a Super Bowl champ, just went into your studio. Meanwhile, Steve Young works out in Orangetheory almost every single day. And a lot of famous people, Britney Spears loves Orangetheory. I think the tale of the story is that you have to go knock on doors. You can't just sit there, oh, you played in the NFL. There's 200,000 guys at any given time that play in the NFL. Nobody cares that you played in the NFL. Who are you? What are you all about? What's your DNA? What's your ethos? What's your mission, vision, and values? And how are you going to add value to something that you're doing? And so you got to bang and you got to knock on doors. And if you want the deal flow, if you want the opportunities, then you have to do the DD, the due diligence to discover those. And you're right. A lot of things come in the DM, but I find that a lot of my best deals, I'm knocking on the doors. I called Pathwater. I called Tonal. Yeah. Some of these deals that I get done, I decided to invest in Elon Musk and everything that he's doing. I knocked on the doors to find SpaceX. It's not a public company. I had to find ways to get it on the secondary market. So if there's things that you want, you got to go out there and get it. In the NFL, like, I wasn't drafted. I had to go bang on the doors to get in. I wasn't even offered a scholarship to my alma mater, UCLA, out of junior college, because I didn't get one out of high school. I sent my tape to UCLA and they gave me a scholarship. And then I became, an all Pac-10 linebacker for UCLA. So that's always been my motto, but I've always been an underdog. I've always been underrated. People never expected me to do the things that I do and achieve the things that I achieve. So that's my motto. It's a little bit harder for some of these guys that are first round draft picks, but they have a great head start. You're a first round draft pick. You got a little stack of money and some opportunity there. But I think that for them, that's a disadvantage. For me, it was an advantage to always be overlooked.
No, I think it's this idea of having a mix between passion and opportunity. You certainly have the passion, and then you had to go out and find the opportunity. One of the big things that we're seeing that's shifting, I think, in the mindset of like this new generation of athletes is going from just being an endorser to now being an owner. And they want to start these brands early. They're making enough money from their day job where they can afford to take a couple of bets on brands where their name, image, and likeness is actually going to help and grow the brand. You were early to that, coming in as a Super Bowl winner, coming in and taking over some Orangetheory franchises. What are some things that worked for you in terms of, not where Brendon the entrepreneur could actually help, but Brendon the NFL athlete could help?
If it's Tonal, speaking directly to that company, like obviously I have a fitness background. I'm a certified personal trainer as well. I'm a Super Bowl champion. On all the teams that I played on, we'd always have these fitness competitions. I'd always win like the strongman competition or the most fit guy on the team. So, have that pedigree there that gives them credence. It's checking off boxes like this company is what they say they are if it can work for an NFL athlete, but he's also the best of the best. He's a Pro Bowler. He's a Super Bowl champion. So, I add relevance to these companies where I say that, I'm not an influencer, but I have influence just based on my credentials and the things that I've done and the things that I've accomplished. So you know what it's like. It's a strategic investment. It's a strategic opportunity. And so for me, I'd rather get equity. I'd rather get points. I'd rather get basis points than take 50 grand. Like you can't pay me 20, 30, 40, 50 grand. Like I'm already an executive with a $300 million company that I started, like you said, from a couple $1 million with my partners, of course. Yeah. But you can't pay me 30, 40, 50 grand. Whereas, some of these influencers, which are just as big and just as popular as the athletes, and they actually even have more influence, more followers, they're kind of just signing off for this early satisfaction of just getting a quick little check. But really, if you want to secure the bag, you're getting equity, you're getting basis points, and then you're having a strategic relationship, a strategic partnership with these companies where you're helping them develop, and you got to just put together a better package, a better deal. So as the company's benefiting, you're helping build someone else's company, but build their company and your company that you're in a partnership together with. And that's kind of the genesis of what you've seen happening. But who's done this? LeBron's done it. Kobe's done it. Rick Ross has done it. There's a lot of athletes and entertainers that have done this in the past. And now you're seeing, influencers are starting to do it and they're having big names, but athletes that aren't even everyday household names, guys like me need to start doing things like this. And I see guys doing it. One of the early, a lot of guys are into Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. That's a way for them to change and secure their financial future. So we think, and I think, but I like the way that things are going. Guys are a lot more investment conscious now than they ever were before.
I think you're spot on there, Brendon, which is that I think folks, when they were endorsers, were looking at it as getting a check in. And now I think when folks are invested, they start to take a lot more interest on the business side of it, right? So it's not just, okay, I showed up for a shoot or I'm doing a couple of Instagram posts. No, let me actually understand the unit economics. Let me actually understand what your packaging costs are. And, maybe this is the thing that I think a lot of folks miss about having athletes or entertainers on board their company. It's not just about the doors at the front of the house, the social posts, the PR. It's about the doors at the back of the house. You're rubbing shoulders with executives from all the top industries. And by virtue of who you are, you're able to open those doors. But that only comes from taking an interest on the business side, which it certainly seems like, especially with Orange Theory and a lot of the other stuff that you've done, you really dig in. Maybe let's talk about the metrics a little bit. I've always been curious because we like to dig in on this stuff. When you are looking at a new location for a franchise, how do you evaluate that? What are the inputs and outputs that let you know that this is going to be a successful franchise location?
Well, for the most part, I know the lay of the land, but just based off of what I know, that's not good enough. So you dive into demographical software tools. We use Buxton and Orangetheory Fitness. So what's Buxton going to tell me? It already has all the core members that we're looking for. Buxton's a service, so anybody could use Buxton, and then you could base your studies on whatever it is that your company offers. Well, Orangetheory offers fitness. We're looking for people with a certain amount of income, a certain education. Most of our members are women, but we're also looking for men as well. And then it tells us how many people are inside that core circle, how many core customers we have in a 1 mile ring, a 2 mile ring, a 3 mile ring. At this juncture, I can just say, hey, I need to put one in Culver City. I need to put one in Santa Monica. I need to be in Brentwood. I need to be in Miracle Mile. I kind of know already just from the lay of land of LA, but we also have units in Cincinnati, Ohio. We have units all throughout the Bay Area where, I know the Bay Area decently, but once you start getting to Walnut Creek in the East Bay, I don't know it as well. So Buxton's very helpful. We have units in Melbourne, Australia, and I don't know the lay of the land there, even though my partners do. But, this is where Buxton and that tool comes in, and it helps us really study what the topography is from a human sense and what each individual human economics are in that area. So it's a great tool. So I'm like, let me get on that Buxton. What's the Buxton score? And so my partners and I always have bets like, I bet you that this location is going to do better than this location. Because of course it's one that I found or one that my partner Amy or my partner Paul found. And we kind of all have bets like, what are the AUV? What's the average unit volume going to be in this location versus that location? And it's fun to kind of have bets.
And how do you have to adapt across locations? I'm really curious about that because obviously what appeals to one demographic doesn't appeal to another. So are you changing the programming? Are you changing the membership offerings? I mean, how do you adapt it, let's say, on a location or geography basis?
On a geography basis, the only things that are really adaptable that change are parking. So a San Francisco unit may not offer parking, whereas all the LA units offer parking. But if we're in Koreatown in LA, which we are, we don't offer parking. So that's one of the things. If it's a population that's used to no parking, then we'll either offer it or we won't, but we'll always try to get it if we can. In terms of kind of the people, you have to kind of know the people and what the school schedule is around your area. And so what time is school drop off? If school drop off is at 8 a.m., then we don't want to offer an 8 a.m. class. We want to offer an 8:30 a.m. class. So those are just some of the little nuances that make a difference in, and help your customers out. And you'd be dumb if you didn't study and figure those things out, right? Like, why is the 8 a.m. class empty. Well, that's school drop-off time. And obviously not all the schools drop off at the same time, but we want to make it a time where moms and dads can get to the studio. And so those are just some of the little things. They're little nuances, not quite as important. But honestly, Orange Theory, and then also something that's geographic, is the price of a membership. So all of our LA memberships cost the same. For the most part, the Bay Area costs the same. Cost of living in Cincinnati is a little bit less, so that's a cheaper membership, but relatively based, it's the same. So those are some of the things that change. But in terms of the program and what we do and what we offer, that doesn't change. There's 1,300 locations. Whatever workout is being done at one location, it's being done at the other 1,300 locations. And we have one workout a day. It changes every single day, and people know exactly what to expect. It's like Starbucks. We want your experience in LA to be no different than your experience in Chicago or your experience in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Yeah, there's a comfort in that sort of brand value, right? And there's a comfort in sort of like that brand consistency, which allows folks to know, I go to any location, I know what I'm getting. I guess pivoting a little bit away from that, BA, we talk about, you mentioned that you are an LP with our friends at Next Play Capital and Liquid Ventures. You've invested in quite a few startups via SPVs. For somebody who follows your Instagram page, which I do, your passion for tech and innovation could not be clearer. How do you go from passionate about tech to kind of seeing the deal flow where you can now be an active investor in tech?
This is a multi-pronged question because there's several fingers on this hand for the question that you're asking me. First and foremost, venture capital, it's not lucrative for everybody. The right people doing venture capital are making 90% of the money in venture capital. I think it's that 10% of successful venture capital firms are making 90% of the money. The other 90% are making 10% of the money. So you have to be with the right venture capital partners. So it's very interesting. I'm in PE, which is private money, and then there's venture capital money, which is also private money, but venture capital, at least for Next Play, they're kind of like mid-stage. They're not super early. They're not angel investors. And then private equity, it's more like they want to get the deals. There's less money involved, but they want to kind of get little companies like me and eat up these small companies that are generating a lot of cash flow, whereas some of these venture capital, at least for Next Play, aren't even necessarily generating capital yet, but they're acquiring billion-dollar companies, whereas my PE, it's $1 billion firm. They're acquiring $100 million companies. It's been interesting because being in private equity, I see things from one side, but in venture, I'm an LP. So it's like they're pitching to me in a sense. And then in private equity, we were pitching to them. So it's kind of like I've come full circle. And then also being an entrepreneur myself, initially we were a startup and kind of a founder, and then developing that. And then eventually we went and hired a CEO, a CFO, a controller in HR and all those pieces to build our company. But just starting from scratch, like I kind of see things in a very different way. So for me, the most important thing is like, who's running these companies? Like, who's their Elon Musk? What's going on with the company? Who's their Kathy Wood, like ARK Invest? Like, who's the brains and who's the engine behind what they're doing? And then, of course, there's the concept. There's the disruption factor. But before you kind of get into those things, it's like, what's your financial foundation like?
Yeah.
What are the pillars of your financial foundation? Do you have life insurance? What other investments do you have? Securities? Then you can get into venture and some private equity. And what's your main cash flow like? What's your business? And those things all evolve and morph and change over time. Whereas there's investments that I do now that I wouldn't have done in the past. When I'm 90 years old, there'll be investments that I do that I wouldn't do now when I'm 45, So those things are ever changing. And it changed in April of 2020. Your whole life changed in April of 2020. And so you have to be courageous and you have to change that. And I changed my investment thesis in March of 2020 as well. So
what surprised you the most going from that now? So you coming from private equity, which is cash flow based businesses, then you're looking at venture capital, early stage businesses not generating cash flow. What was the hardest lesson you had to learn, or kind of what surprised you the most as you were doing that?
In private equity, like there are other brands that our private equity partners are partners with. But for us, like we have to meet all the terms of our deal, So when COVID and all these things happened, we shut our business down for over a year. We had to do injections of capital into the company to keep it alive. And we got some PPE money and all that, but we still had to put money back in pro rata based on what your equity is in the company. And we had to do more than one capital injection. So things happen, things pivot. We went from a position of strength to a black swan event. Like you couldn't have told me nothing in March of 2019 or 2020 before all this happened. Like our business was cash flowing. Our private equity partners were super happy. And we're on our way to 100 locations, and we've kind of been stumped since then, but we're making our way back. And then those things happened in venture capital as well, but it's a little different being under the gun and being the one that's looking at the companies that are coming in, which has been fun as well. And that led to additional deal flow. And like you said, doing SPVs for other companies. And a lot of companies had opportunities through COVID as well. And a lot of companies shut down. Really, life in the world changed. And regardless of my main cash flow company being valued less now than it was almost 2 years ago, I think the education and the enlightening and the change and the transformation that happened for me is almost better. You know, I don't want to take away from all the hurt that the world went through as well, but I had a baby in that time. I took control. I do have my financial advisor is a PhD in finance, and he's amazing. He's a family member too, which is, I mean, he's not a blood family member, but he's a family member. Just I've been with him for so long and he's taught me so much. But just to be able to have him as an educational pillar and to kind of learn like what happens when interest rates go up for growth companies, and then what happens to value companies when interest rates go up. What happens, you know, what are some of the cyclical things that happen with the stock market and black swan events? And I had somebody there to help me. And so I got into Robinhood right before all that stuff happened, and the majority of my money he manages, and then we go back and forth and we talk about, you know, we put our XY axis together and we have high risk, high reward, which is like crypto, and even Tesla goes in that category. Low risk, high reward, low risk, low reward, and high reward, low risk, but there's not too many of those, you know? So we wanted to be everywhere on that XY axis, but we really, the learning lesson for me through that situation is like, okay, there's an opportunity right now to invest, whether it be private or whether it be public. Let's go public. So I freaking quadrupled down on Tesla, public market. I quadrupled down on Tesla. I got out of some of my bonds and some of my other things. And then I quadrupled down on my life insurance. So low risk, low reward, and high risk, high reward. And I kind of got out of some of the two other sectors a little bit. And that was a very scary but very lucrative move that I did. And there's so many different cool things you could do with life insurance. I dove down into that. But the learning lesson for me was really just re-strategizing. Like, I can't just sit here and rely on Orangetheory. And, you know, we want to do an exit someday of 400 million to $1 billion, but we don't know if that market's going to come back. Where can I kind of pick up the stones and where can I make up that margin that I'm losing there? So I had to kind of restructure things, and I'm glad I did.
And it's great advice for folks, right? As the exogenous shocks come into your portfolio, you can't just set it and forget it. You have to be on top of it. I want to just touch on that last bit you mentioned about what the market is going to look like. You're a personal trainer. You are an early investor in Tonal, which obviously has seen tremendous growth since the pandemic began. Let's put our prediction hat on a little bit, looking at the future of fitness and wellness, picking some winners and losers. What does it look like? Is it in studio, in person, in gym? Is it all at home like Peloton, Tonal? Some kind of hybrid? I mean, what does the future state of the fitness world look like to you?
Yeah, well, I think more and more people are going to continue to work out. So that's what COVID did do is, it's kind of prophylactic for COVID. You can still get COVID, of course, but it's probably the effects are going to be less if you work out and you're in shape, right? So I think that really opened up a lot of people's eyes like, hey, we need to start working out. And we see the uptick of people putting more of an emphasis on mental and physical health. I think that the fitness market is going to continue to expand and grow. However, I don't know if it's going to flow into our bucket necessarily. We want to try to maintain as much of the market share as we had before, but I think the growth is going to come with the Pelotons, with the Tonal and some of these at-home apps. I think the gym is going to kind of just stay where it is and be a kind of a stagnant market. There is a group of people that love to go to the gym, but I think, if you're an Equinox, you have an advantage, or if you're kind of like that cheap membership. So kind of the gyms that were kind of in between, I think we'll see those kind of go away, which we've already seen happening. And you're either going to be at some prime gym or some cheap gym, home fitness, like Peloton, these free apps, Tonal for show, because our trajectory is already higher than Peloton's at the same stage of their growth, which is very encouraging to see. And then I think studio fitness is going to kind of maintain its market share. And I just want to get our market share back. So I'm optimistic about that. But as long as there's masks in California, that's going to be tough. But we see that a lot of our partners in other states where there's not masks required, they're back to 80-90% of their pre-COVID rates.
That is positive news to hear. Brendon, you have been so generous with your time today. I want to wrap on one question that we love to ask all of our guests. What is some advice that you wish you could give your younger self?
I was always an underdog and I was always going to go work, but I always wanted to prove myself. And so maybe there was a little bit of self-doubt there, or maybe there was some inhibition. Like, obviously I went for it, but I think I could have done more. I think I left some meat on the bone. So whether this is business or chasing your goals, chasing your dreams, or the NFL, you have a moonshot goal, and stick to that moonshot goal and ask for help if you need it. Bang on the doors, knock on the doors, and you're good enough. If you believe and you work hard and you sacrifice and dedicate yourself, you're good enough and you can achieve and you can accomplish. And don't think that you're less than anybody, no matter what their status is and no matter what your status is. All human beings are equal. So go out there, put your head down, work, show out, prove yourself, and all the right things should happen for you. And it worked out really well for me, but I still think I left a little bit of meat on the bone.
I love that. Look, nobody's going to believe in you if you don't believe in you, right? So that is fantastic advice. And if there's anything that I hope our listeners take away from this, is that conducting your business and really living your life with the openness, transparency, and like authenticity with which you live your life is really a great way to let the right opportunities in. So you, my friend, are living proof of that. I want to thank you so much for being on The Game Plan with us today.
Thanks for having me. And in the words of Ronnie Lott, make sure you exhaust the day. If you exhaust the day and you put your head down every day tired, then you're going to be successful.
That's it for this week's episode of The Game Plan with Jake Kapoor and Tim Cott. As always, thanks so much for listening. This episode was edited by Emmanuel Maestri, and our theme music is called Champ by Stuart Moore. Hey, did you know that you can watch as well as listen to The Game Plan? Head over to our YouTube page for tons of great video content. And if you're still listening, you must really love The Game Plan. Give us a like, retweet, or hey, better yet, just leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. We'll see you next week on The Game Plan.